I think I want to be a junkie when I grow up. Said no one ever. That wasn't my dream as a little girl. But I spent 18 years in the darkness of addiction, meth addiction. I was in and out of county jail until 2011, when I found myself being chased down by the feds on a Denver highway. I was being federally indicted for conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine. That's my actual booking photo. Talk about a wake-up call. It took a few weeks for my brain to clear and for me to really understand how much trouble I was in, which was a lot. And I just remember this feeling in my soul. And it was whispering to me that there was a better life if I would just choose more for myself. And I held on to that still small voice. And I healed, and I worked hard, and I changed my life. And by the time I was released from incarceration, I was a changed woman. It took a few years for me to acclimate myself to a clean and sober lifestyle, which suited me well. I loved being clean and sober. More than that, though, I loved being clean and sober Kara. And I had trouble. I had trouble owning my past, though. I had a fractured self-image and a deep fear of judgment, and both of those stood in the way of me owning my background, which included countless incarcerations, decades of substance abuse, using drugs while I was pregnant with my daughter, and now a federal prison sentence. And this is when I began to climb the achievement ladder. You see, I realized quickly that achievement offered me grace for my past, and people seemed to like and accept me into their circles as I achieved, so I achieved. I filled every single day with the job that I had. I also went to college. I served on the board of a nonprofit. I fundraised for other nonprofits. And I belonged to so many groups that it was exhausting trying to keep up with them all. I even started training for marathons, thinking that if I could have the personal discipline that it takes to train and run 26 miles, I'd finally be good enough. I believed that if I did enough, I'd have value. It was nonstop doing instead of centered and confident being. And then a seemingly random event happened in my life. An executive from a corporation in New York City offered me a role with their company. It was very exciting. But it meant working remotely and alone from Denver. I really thought that it was my dream job. But when my home became my office, it actually became my prison. I was so used to having a structured day filled with constant interaction and affirmation from other people, and all of a sudden there were no achievements and no people in my day-to-day. Working at home suits some people, but for me, I had never done it before. I had no idea what to expect. The isolation of living alone and working from home led to a familiar darkness that I had not known in many years. I see now that change in isolation shows us very quickly where the cracks are. I had been clean and sober for over 8 years, and I relapsed. First on alcohol, and then with meth. I had focused so much on projecting this confident image to people that when my quicksand self-image dissolved, I relapsed. And I didn't want anybody to know about it. My identity and my branding was built on being clean and sober Kara. And I had spent 8 years showing people that those of us who struggle with substance abuse and previous incarceration have value beyond statistics and stigmas. Have you ever been so ashamed of something from your past that you either tried to shove it down like it never happened, or you thought you could achieve your way out of its shadow, like me? As part of my achievement-based lifestyle, I had begun training for the New York City Marathon when I began this period of isolation that ultimately led to my relapse. While I was stitching myself back together in a rehab facility, I had a decision to make. Do I keep training for this race or not? And not much else made sense in my life at the time, so I kept training. And days turned into weeks and months, and race day finally arrived. And I flew to New York City. It was so glamorous. I was running the New York City Marathon. Like, oh my gosh. In the morning of, everybody's taking the ferry down to Staten Island, and I joined them. And I looked out at all the other runners when we got to the island. And I wanted to be invisible. What if the other runners knew that I had relapsed on meth a few months prior? Runners don't relapse on meth, I told myself. And then I had one of those profound spirit moments that when they happen, you know that it's God's voice, and He is either speaking to you or through you. And I realized what I was ashamed about is what actually gave me true identity. You see, our stories, they define our authentic identities. And my story included all kinds of things I wasn't proud of. Years spent in and out of jail, a prison sentence, this relapse. Every single part of my story is beautiful and it's unique to me. Just like every single part of your story is beautiful and unique to you. And this is when I decided to choose to live my life unapologetically real. What does that mean? It means, to the best of my ability, I show up in my authentic skin and not a safer, projected version of me. It means that I embrace all the imperfections from my past, especially the ones that I don't want anybody to know about. It means that I love myself and I give myself grace for being a human. I may or may not have been the only runner that day who relapsed on meth during training, but I can tell you one thing for sure. I was a flawed human being out there about to run my heart out with other flawed human beings. And I finished that race, loving my flawed self. I made the commitment that morning on Staten Island to heal my identity and my self-image so I could finally embrace my past, embrace my flaws, and embrace my unapologetic realness. What are the stories of your past that you don't want anybody to know about? Are you tired of hiding? I know I was. What if we loved ourselves so much that the fear melted away? Can you imagine a world where we can embrace our stories and share our truth? The world needs our stories now more than ever, and what we think are the worst parts about us are truly the most beautiful parts. And if we would have the courage to share them, would help others on their journey to embracing their authentic identities. What's the first step? What is the first step in us owning our unapologetic realness? It's permission. It's permission. Will you give yourself permission today to let your soul, your body, and your mind know to the core of your being that every single one of your stories from the past is not something to hide in shame, but to embrace and to share? When we open up ourselves and we share the real stuff, that's when life goes from disassociated and lacking connection to deeply connected and real. I know it's scary. I know it's scary. But I have been in a literal prison behind barbed wire fencing, and a prison that existed solely in my head and in my heart. And I can tell you that owning my unapologetic realness and standing in my truth, it's the most free I have ever been. Will you join me in becoming real, unapologetically real? Thank you.